DNA, because we're celebrating. Yesterday was DNA Day. And but before we start talking about today's subject, Jonny, will you introduce yourself? And then Edgar, will you introduce yourself as well? And tell us where you're joining from.
Okay, my name is Jonny Perl, and I'm joining from London, England, where it's a beautiful spring evening.
Oh my goodness. Okay, how many hours ahead are you?
So it's currently 7 p.m. for me.
Okay. So this is great. We're all around the world. Okay, Edgar.
Hi, my name is Edgar Gomez, and yeah, we are part of a global celebration. I'm joining today from Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, and I work for FamilySearch. And we're just so happy to be able to celebrate DNA Day today with Jonny and Wendy and with all of you. And we have an exciting session, 45 minutes, where you can ask questions, but we're gonna show you a little bit of what a great tool it is. That we have DNA Painter. And in fact, here at Wendy, the FamilySearch, we've been celebrating actually DNA Day for a while. I think from maybe late February, but also from late February, since we had over 100 classes at RootsTech Connect, the conference that we sponsor, for over a decade. And so a lot of those sessions tend to be on topics that, cover different things about family history, but more and more on DNA. And more of those speak about DNA Painter. In fact, at FamilySearch, we cannot teach a class about DNA these days without mentioning one of the very helpful tools that DNA Painter, that free website, has for our users. So that's pretty exciting.
It's a fan favorite, Jonny. So that's why I think Edgar was talking about there were multiple classes about it, and there's so much resource, and people are really interested in understanding how their DNA can help them connect to their family, which is something FamilySearch and RootsTech does. So let's get started, and people who are watching, let us know what questions you have, and we will make sure and hopefully address them in the chat or here live. And we're just here for the conversation, and welcome everyone. So let's go. Let's get started. Tell us, talk to us.
Okay, so you wanted to hear a bit about my background and how I got into genealogy, Wendy, is that right?
Yes.
So from my perspective, I was born in Northern Ireland, but I grew up in England. And I regard myself as coming to family history really late. I think I was in my early 30s. And I say that because I know I would have loved it if I'd somehow been turned onto it earlier, but it just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. I was into history, I was into old buildings, but it was really only I was having a chat with my mother, I think it was in 2006 or 7, and she suddenly started mentioning all these names from her side of the family. And she was an only child. And I'd moved from Northern Ireland when I was not yet 2 years old. So I was suddenly like, wait a minute, who are all these people? I need to know who they are. And I don't know what time I went to bed that night, but it was not very long before I got up. I was hooked from that moment, if you like. So yeah, it was very sudden.
Okay. And so you became curious and interested, but many of us are curious and interested, but we haven't launched a product.
Oh, well, that was a bit unusual. I think that was just a confluence of different things happened. I took the DNA test. Again, not an early adopter, really. Mm-hmm. I took it at the end of 2016. But I, like everyone else who takes one, really, there's a hardcore of people who really know this stuff well. I was just your average genealogist who'd run out of things to try, and I wanted to see what I could get out of it. And when I spat into the tube, I had no idea what I was going to get out of it at all. But then when I got the results back, I'm a naturally curious person, and I also happen to be a freelance web developer. And so those things just kind of came together at that moment. And honestly, when I started to build a website, I knew very little about DNA. I learned a lot as I went along. And it all kind of snowballed from there, really, because I was able to collaborate with a lot of great people and learn a lot very quickly.
Well, what a fantastic resource. And I'm excited to learn more about it. Thank you. And how fun to learn about you being naturally curious. I think so many people interested in genealogy and family history are curious. It's just something that we have in common. That's awesome. Okay, Edgar, take it away.
Yeah, so Jonny, maybe we can start by explaining to some of the people in the audience what DNA Painter is. So how would you describe DNA Painter for somebody coming new to the site?
Okay, it is a website at dnapainter.com, which is really for anyone who's taken a DNA test and has questions about it and wants to learn about it. Now, it's not a one-stop shop for everything by any means, but it lets you do lots of quite interesting things to visualize your DNA and also explore how you might be connected to someone. So there are kind of three groups of things there. I've got ancestral trees. So that lets you make a kind of visualization of your direct line in a fan chart or a pedigree chart. And then it lets you overlay the specific DNA inheritance paths on top of that, and also do lots of other cool visualization things that I might show you later. Then we've got chromosome mapping, which is definitely impossible to describe in 20 seconds, but I'll try. And that's where you take the segments of DNA that you share with a known relative, and you think, well, how am I connected to this person? That DNA must have come from this ancestral couple in my pedigree chart, because otherwise, why would I have those segments of DNA? I have them via this connection. And if you take that to its extreme, you can build this kind of colorful tapestry that describes your ancestry. And then I've got these probability-based tools, which I did in collaboration with a few other people, actually. So we've got the shared Centimorgan tool as a big one, and we've got what are the odds? So these are ways to figure out who a mystery match is, perhaps, or maybe figure out a mystery in your own family tree and figure out how you might fit into another tree.
Great. So, Jonny, I was wondering if you could tell us, how did you come up with the idea of creating DNA Painter? What was behind the motivation of the site?
I think my own bafflement, Edgar. When I got the results, I had to kind of peel away. When we're at the early stages of DNA testing, right? And if we go back 3-4 years when I took the test, I had to kind of figure out, what is this? It's not just about a pie chart with ethnicity, is it? There's something real in here, but what exactly is it? There's a lot of misinformation around. I think there's a lot of people have a look at the pie chart and they say, oh, well, that wasn't what I thought it was, so therefore the test is rubbish. It doesn't mean anything. I knew there was something there, but I needed to figure out what it was. And in my personal, slightly idiosyncratic brain, the way to figure it out was to do this chromosome mapping. Yeah. So I knew that when I'd identified one match, I needed to have that information in front of me so that I could come back later on and then compare other matches with that person. And those matches might be on different testing platforms. So I think that was what drove me to do it. There were other ways of doing that, but they weren't going to let you kind of put some stuff in and then come back and then put more in and then put more in. And obviously I've been doing this for 4 years now, so it's quite big now, the map. And so that drove me on. But after that, it wasn't about me. It was all about everyone else, because it was more popular than I expected it to be. And so it became a collaboration between me and the rest of the community, because people came back immediately with all these great ideas. And, you know, I'm a programmer and I can listen. So that's how it all came to fruition.
Fantastic. What a great story.
I'm glad you like it, Wendy.
So for somebody coming new, what are the benefits of DNA Painter? You know, like, what's the average user getting out of it?
Most users will come there probably for the interactive online tool called the shared Centimorgan tool. So this is taking the results of a crowdsourced project by Blaine Bettinger, who's a very respected genealogist in the field. He collected information from over 60,000 data points where people say, okay, well, imagine you and I, Edgar, were a third cousins. I could say, okay, well, Edgar's my third cousin and we share 80 centimorgans of DNA. So he got 60,000 contributions like that, did some statistical normalization, and then produced what's really a very, very powerful kind of real empirical data resource. So a few years ago, I made this interactive online version of that, which you can find on my website. And I would say probably about 70% of the people who use DNA Painter are there for that, because it's quite a nice kind of in one place version of that information. And then there are probabilities added in, so you can figure out, well, okay, it's likely that Edgar's a third cousin, but maybe he could be more distant based on that amount of DNA shared. So that's a big one. But it depends who you are. It depends what you're trying to do. Everyone comes to this with different goals, don't they? Some of us just have a vague idea. I'd like to take my tree back further. Some people are like, I need to trace my aunt or my great aunt. What happened to her? You know, and they have a massive mystery to solve. So it really depends who you are and what you want to do. But hopefully there's something for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, many of us have taken DNA tests, and at some point we feel overwhelmed with, the information that we receive, and we just don't know what to do with that. So I think it's great to have tools like DNA Painter to help us figure it out, how we connect. And perhaps we can talk about some of those tools. What are some of the most popular tools that you see users, coming to the site for?
I guess the most popular one is the one I just mentioned. Should I share the screen and talk through a couple of them? Would that make sense?
Absolutely.
And let me tell you, we're already getting questions about the WATO tool and its new feature.
We'll get to that.
I'll see what I can do on that in a little bit, Wendy. So the Shared Centimorgan project tool looks like this. And I'm sure a lot of people listening will be familiar with this, but I'll just give you a quick chat through it because it's very popular. So this is data compiled by Blaine Bettinger, and it was updated actually just in March last year. So this is all pretty up to date. And if you enter a number in there where it says enter the total Centimorgan, I'm not sure if you can see that on your screen. Here I've entered 282. And what it's done is it's grayed out all of the relationships below. We can't see them all on the screen, but just imagine that you can. And it's showing just those that are possible. So in this case, if I click on some of these relationships, perhaps I think it's a half-second cousin, for example, but it says it's a 16% probability. What does that really mean? If I click on the half-second cousin, I can actually see this histogram, which Blaine produced as part of his project. And this lets you see, well, 282 there, that's the block there that ends in 300. So only 7 submissions is right over there on the right-hand shoulder of the data. Only 7 submissions did that. So it could be a half-second cousin. That is a genuine probability, but I guess I'd probably be looking at other ones and see if there's anything else where it seems to be more likely, if you like. So it's really a way of exploring the data that you have. It doesn't magically tell you the answer, because guess what? Recombination is really random, and the amounts of DNA you share with people they are going to vary massively, but it can hopefully give you bits of evidence that can help you. So that's a really big one. What are the odds then is taking that a bit further. So you've got not just one data point, but in this tree here, we can see we've got 3 different matches who Elizabeth matches, and this is their tree. And we're trying to figure out where Elizabeth might fit into this tree. So we're trying to figure out which of these people could be her father. So again, it's doing lots of maths behind the scenes to figure out which position in the tree makes most sense based on that amount of DNA shared. So that is a very popular tool as well. That was developed in collaboration with another genealogist called Leah Larkin, and she had some mathematical models that were set up by a fellow Englishman, a guy called Andrew Millard. So that's another really popular one. My heart obviously is always with chromosome maps, because I think they're fabulous.
And Jonny, I have to jump in and say Dawn is saying that she used DNA and DNA Painter to discover a little secret that her grandmother had about her grandfather. So people are responding with, yes, they've used some of these tools. And so this is awesome.
I'm pleased to hear that. Because I've got it on the screen, I'll just evangelize about chromosome mapping for a second, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course.
So in chromosome mapping, we're trying to figure out kind of who we're made of, if you like, as in who gave us which bits of our DNA. So what we're looking at here is the kind of easier version of chromosome mapping. And that's when you do someone from a younger generation. So this is my son's chromosome map. Now, all 4 of my son's grandparents have tested their DNA. And in fact, I've done a visual phasing project for both of my son's parents, for me and for my partner. So I was able to make this chromosome map, which shows the bits of DNA he got from each of his 8 great-grandparents, which is obviously science fiction for most of us to be able to do that. But because he's a generation below and he was lucky enough to have all 4 grandparents alive in this era and able to test for him, we can do that. But then a more realistic chromosome map, which probably looks more like those of people listening, is this one, which is my mother's, where I am actually able to figure out mostly if it's maternal or paternal. And there are some very prominent family groups, but in general, I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. If I wasn't building tools, I'd probably spend more time on this and it would be better. But yeah, chromosome mapping is not, you click your fingers and you get this amazing thing. It's about engaging with your DNA and your family history and seeing what the possibilities are and just imagining where could this have come from. And it's like a logic puzzle. I love it. Okay.
And I think, that's what DNA really celebrates. We celebrate today the fact that we have all of this amazing information and that we can derive meaning out of that. And as a creator, for DNA Painter, it seems like you excel at collaboration and creating new useful tools. How do you go about deciding what new tools to add?
I listen to what people say, and when I'm not programming, I spend a lot of time responding to queries, both via email, Facebook, and Twitter. So I kind of get a sense of which areas people are most hot on and most in need of help with, if you like. But in general, I'm open-minded. I see what comes along. I've also, as you'll have gathered, got my own hobby horses, and if truth be told, a lot of the things I've developed is because I particularly need a tool to do a specific thing for me, and I hope that other people will want it as well. But for example, my son's chromosome map there, I built a tool to help me do that because I needed it, because I wanted to do that. There was nothing else I was going to do that day when his results came in. So yeah, I'm split between selfishness and altruism, really. I do want to work with other people, and I want to find out what the community most needs, I guess.
I think that's great. And I think it shows in your tool, being so useful to so many people. We've seen classes at RootsTech now in French and Swedish and other languages, people
those are cool, yeah.
Showing, how they're using your tool. And I think that work of listening closely to the user is paying off. So what's next? What are some of the tools that are coming up next?
Okay, well, I've just released something that I could show you very quickly because
yes,
I'm very proud. I'm so proud. I've just released this thing called Dimensions. So that looks a bit, well, if I introduce trees to you first, so I have these ancestral trees. So this is my son's pedigree chart. And so you can kind of put custom color coding in, but you can also add what I've called dimensions, and it can pull extra data out of your GEDCOM file. So this is a fan chart, and this shows the age at death for my son's ancestors. So it's almost like a kind of heat map with these different shades of blue, and you can see the areas with a darker blue are where people lived longer, and the areas that are more pale blue, turquoisey color, that's people who lived less long. So we can see I've got a great grandmother, for example, who died at 47. So you can maybe see things that you didn't see before. You might have had the information, but you might suddenly notice that, for example, one part of the tree is much darker than another, if you like. And then another dimension that you can generate is the country of birth. Again, these aren't specifically DNA related things, but you could use this feature for DNA, which is a fun thing. So for example, you could combine some of the other filters within the trees with this. You might find that most of your X chromosome came from England, for example, as opposed to Germany or Ireland. That might be one way that you could use it. So again, it's trying to pull this information out of your GEDCOM file to kind of normalize those strings of text that says Belfast, Northern Ireland. It will try and figure out which country you're talking about. But fundamentally, obviously, I intended this as an add-on to the DNA aspect of the site, to the chromosome maps. So one thing you can do is you can overlay those X DNA inheritance paths or Y DNA. So this shows that my son statistically is likely to have inherited 1/4 of his DNA from Edith Louise Sambles, who is his second great-grandmother. But in terms of what's next, Edgar, the aim would be to integrate this fully with the chromosome maps so that when you're mapping your chromosomes, you can start potentially supercharging it and saying, okay, well, this bit came from this Arnhem-Tafel number, this person in my ancestry, and therefore, did I have a recombination point here? So maybe this bit must have come from the other grandparent on that side, or was there a recombination point in a different generation? And I want to start getting serious with this, with the DNA education, and try to supercharge that. That's my next big plan.
That's exciting. For people that are coming in new, or maybe they already have an account, but they just don't know how to make the most of it, do you have any tips for either new users or for people that could be doing more with the many tools that you have?
I do. The first thing I would say is one thing I've made myself do in the last 6 months that is quite hard work, but I'm glad I did it, is I made myself write blog posts every month. It's funny, you're a grown up and you set yourself homework, but basically I started a mailing list, so I have to write articles. And so that forces me to actually express stuff maybe a bit clearer than I normally do. So I'm not saying all the articles are amazing, because I'm sure they're not, but there's some of them break it down quite a lot. And the first thing I would say to a new user is think about what it is you're really trying to do before lurching into a specific activity like chromosome mapping or the probability trees. Think to yourself, do I just want to learn more about DNA? Do I want to just immerse myself in that? Or am I actually looking for a specific mystery grandfather? For example, because you'd probably do two very different things. For example, if you had a mystery grandfather, you wouldn't just start mapping your chromosomes and say, well, where's my grandfather? That isn't really how it would work. It'd be much more powerful probably to start to cluster your matches and figure out other family trees that you seem to be related to and try and fit yourself into those trees, potentially using the what are the odds tool. Whereas for me, chromosome mapping has been brilliant because it's made me really embrace DNA and learn so much more about it than I would have done if I wasn't doing it. So the main thing to do is just figure out what it is you want to do.
Go ahead, Wendy.
I was just going to say, we have a question from someone. Is now a good time?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Okay. Anita is asking, and this is, kind of along the lines of what you were talking about. She has a very complicated Italian family tree, and she is wondering what you would recommend she start with to sort out her DNA matches with her family tree.
It would slightly depend.
Regionally specific that you recommend, or if it's just ubiquitous regardless of where?
Well, you definitely should take into account the region. My advice would probably depend on the degree of intermarriage and or endogamy within that community, because obviously if you have a remote mountain community, you may find that the same kind of families have been marrying each other over many, many generations, which can lead to some interesting outcomes in terms of trying to evaluate relationships. But the other thing I'd take into account is just how big are those matches, because if you're looking at smaller matches, and as a European tester, often I am dealing with important matches who are only maybe 15, 20, 30 centimorgans. You have to just be open-minded that you don't really have an easy way of knowing if that's a 20-generation-old match or a 4-generation-old match. So you have to tread a bit carefully. I'm always jealous of Americans who've got 1,000 third and fourth cousins on ancestry. Well, probably not many of them have that, but I'm always jealous anyway.
Okay, and I have one more question, and then we'll go back to.
Okay.
And this one's very specific. So
okay.
Brian is asking if you have talked to anyone NHS in the NHS in England about DNA Painter or the Genome Campus at Hingston.
I have not. I mean, I've never really delved too much into the medical side of it, mainly because I'm obsessed with genealogy and there's no room left in my brain. But when I was last in Salt Lake City at RootsTech, I did launch a feature which slightly got forgotten by everyone, including me, to be honest, which enabled you to check a button and you can show traits on your chromosome map. So that was the step in that direction that I took, because I know it's very interesting to a lot of people and quite important. So if you have a chromosome map at DNA Painter and you go into the settings, the little cog above chromosome 1, anyone can check that button, and then lots of little pins will appear. And I collaborated with a lady called Christy who works with Diane Southard, who helped me because I'm not really a scientist, as it may be clear from what I'm saying. So she helped me make sure those were meaningful and kind of have the descriptions of the genes, which is very interesting. But no, I've not spoken to anyone in the NHS. If anyone calls me, I would be delighted to talk to them.
Yes. Well,
I can help in any way.
Let's recommend that. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I think, again, to emphasize how important it is to have an objective, when we start doing anything with DNA. And if you want some help on defining an objective, we have free consultations with FamilySearch, online now, and you can just sign up for a 30-minute consultation, and we can help you set up an objective and then figure it out what tools may be better depending on your objective. But let's just talk about connections now, because this is really what it's all about, right? We are excited about DNA, but really it's about the fact that we can connect with family members, or that we can actually extend our family trees. So, Jonny, I was wondering if you could tell us more about some of the genetic connections that you have personally made using DNA, whether with your tool
Sure.
or just, before.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've learned actually is if someone writes to you and they want to work with you and they appear to have some idea about genealogy, then the level of the DNA match doesn't really matter at all. I mean, there may or may not be something you can trace there, but getting someone who wants to work with you is most of the battle, right? I don't know about you guys, but for me, if I try to send messages whenever I find a connection or I think I've got an idea about a connection with a match. I always write to them and I don't expect a response. I'm long beyond the thing of, oh, they haven't written back. Well, I wonder what I did wrong. I don't expect them to write back. They normally don't write back, and that's fine because not everyone is me, not everyone is interested in this stuff, and that's no problem. But I got an email, I think 2 months ago from someone, and it was a living DNA where you don't have segment data and you don't have that big a database, but it's still valuable because there's still people who aren't anywhere else potentially. And someone wrote to me and she thought that she had a connection that was interesting. And I looked at it and it was about 18 centimorgans. It might even have been less. So it was a bit like, well, I'm a nice guy and she seems nice, so I'm going to write back. But I had no expectation whatsoever. But because I've done all this phasing work, she was on GEDmatch, so I was able to get the segment. So I knew which line it was on. And then amazingly, it was a Smith line. The last name's Smith in London, right? But we got it. We figured out what that was, right? And that's because she wanted to work with me. I wanted to work with her. Smith in London, unbelievable. So we were actually able to break through the brick wall because she was a better genealogist than me, and she had done some speculative work. Then when we put our ideas together, we were able to figure out who this guy James Smith's wife was. It was absolutely amazing because I had no expectations of that going in. So I think it's like anything, you just need someone you can collaborate with on a genuine level, because if you think about what I just said to you, compare that to sometimes you might get a message that says, hello cousin, how are we related? There's a different level of engagement there, isn't there? So it's about finding people to work with. And how do you find them? I mean, you have to be lucky, obviously, but I think obviously you have to play the averages, don't you? So you write to as many people as you can. Don't write a really long message because it would only put them off anyway. People get creeped out. When I write people long messages that explain exactly how I'm connected to them, most of the time they don't reply because they're like, who is this guy? You need a short, snappy message that has the promise of something good, and maybe you're going to get someone who wants to collaborate. And yeah, that was just really pleasing for me because it was Smith in London and because I'd had no expectation whatsoever. So good.
Those are some really good tips. I think, part of it is, as you said, luck. Actually, sometimes there's somebody else that is working on some of those lines and you just happen to have a connection, whether it's a, remote small connection or a big one. So I think it's important to keep connecting, as you said.
I think the connecting is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because particularly for me, most of the people who connect to the lines that are brick walls for me, they're going to be quite far back. They're going to be towards the limit of autosomal DNA, aren't they? If I'm looking for someone who's a third or fourth or fifth or sixth cousin, then we're not talking about 80 centimorgans. We're talking about 20, 30, 40 probably at the most. So open mind.
Yeah, so another big theme at RootsTech is connection. And you've attended several of these RootsTech conferences over the years. And actually, I've seen you there several times presenting and interacting with all of these people. How has RootsTech helped you improve DNA Painter, or maybe even you as a researcher and user of DNA?
Many ways, really. I mean, I'd heard of RootsTech. Honestly, I'd never really dreamed that I would get to go there. It's just kind of funny when you think about it now because it came to me in 2019. But I had to go for it. It was very out of character for me to go to Salt Lake City in February 2018. But I went because you had this DNA innovation competition. So I entered that and then I actually won it amazingly.
And you won, yeah.
Which meant that lots of people wanted to meet me, which is amazing because I'm not very good at putting myself out there actually. But so it meant that I was on a stand and lots of very interesting people came to talk to me and I talked to them. And unfortunately, I didn't get to go to that many classes because I needed to be in my stand talking to people about this website I just built. But it was great. And I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to try presenting perhaps How did that? I don't even know how that happened. I think I just thought I'll give it a go because it would be a great experience. And then I was very lucky because of some friends here in Europe also asked me to talk at Genetic Genealogy Ireland. So I had a little practice. I did my first talk in, I think it was Belfast in February of 2018. Or was it Dublin? One or the other. And then suddenly I was in RootsTech and I was talking in this massive hall full of people, absolutely terrified. But yeah, I mean, what an experience. It was incredible. And I got to also be on a panel with other people who basically taught me essentially most of what I knew. So that was intimidating, but very exciting as well. And obviously you meet so many people in the expo hall as well. You network, but also you meet new companies doing different interesting things. And yeah, it's an exciting event, definitely. And to be honest, I didn't know what to expect with the virtual version, but it was incredible as well. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah. This year we had over 1 million people that interacted with the site and
the reach is just unbelievable. When you think about how that compares with the number of people who could possibly make it on site, just incredible.
And in fact, those classes remain there throughout the year now with RootsTech Connect. We can just go and watch it or rewatch it because some of these topics are complicated and
they bear rewatching, don't they?
Several times, to get over what you really need to move forward. So I think, RootsTech has been an interesting place to foster connections, and now online it's even more. So for those that are thinking about developing a tool, like you did, do you have any, tips on, or words of encouragement, I would say, for them?
Well, the main encouragement, I suppose, would be we're really still at an early stage of this. There's a lot of room for more innovation and actually a very receptive, welcoming user base potentially. I mean, I worked professionally as a web developer previously, so I'm always terrified of the idea that something might not work properly. But obviously in practice, stuff breaks sometimes and people are very tolerant and cool about it. They want to help you get it right and make it work. And there's so many communities of kind of enthusiastic people. So I'd certainly recommend to anyone developing a tool, even if, like me, I never really used social media until I developed, until I got into genealogy and then developed DNA Paint. And now I use it all the time. Don't really use it for social stuff, but I use it for social DNA stuff. Mm-hmm. But so even people who don't really tend to use Facebook or Twitter, I would recommend doing that just to get to know people and hear ideas and get feedback. If you just take the shared Centimorgan tool, I did that in isolation and I kind of sat on it. I did nothing with it. And I put it up in a Facebook group one day and I went off to pick my kids up from school and I was in the playground. And I had a quick look on my phone. I was like, oh, this seems to, there's 600 likes or something on the post. But then people kept saying, oh, why don't you just do this? Or it'd be brilliant if you could bookmark the number of Centimorgan. So many really, really brilliant ideas just came in those few hours. And so I just did them because when people are saying, this is really brilliant, make it better, then what do? You make it better. So that was very powerful for me. So I'd recommend that everyone try and do it that way because it worked well.
We could definitely see the love and the big drive behind DNA Painter, because you do spend a lot of time listening to people and then implementing.
I've been known to spend a bit of time.
Yeah, and so what are some of those big drivers for you that keep you going? Like, when you said when things don't work or when they seem to be just taking too much of your time and you don't have that, what keeps you going?
Well, I make the time for it because it's important to me. And the main things that keep me going are, one, I need to keep educating myself. I never for a second claim that I'm some big expert who knows everything at all. I definitely know a lot more than I knew in the beginning of 2017, I'll tell you that, but I'm definitely still learning all the time. So how do I learn more? By interacting with people and listening to their problems and trying to help them solve them. But the main thing that drives me on is, people feeding back, either saying it didn't work, so I'm like, quick, make it work, or they're saying, this is really good, but how about if you do this? And sometimes I might get 10 of those in a day and I think, oh, not that. But then you read it and you're like, oh, well, you know what? There's generally something interesting and positive that you can get out of any email, even if it's someone complaining, which does happen sometimes.
So it's important to remember, as you said, that we are still in the very early years of using this information and the information that we'll be able to get in the future. And I think people need to understand that even though it's been 20 years since, we've had these tests available for the public, and several years since millions of people have tested, we still have, many things that to come, and
enormous
we
number
need to
of things,
consider
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead. And I really like what you said as well, that, that you shouldn't feel afraid of asking questions, or because, everybody's learning at some point, everybody's just using this technology. And I really, one of the things I admire you, Jonny, is your ability to connect and to listen to people and to just, really pay attention to everybody.
I try, yeah. I would love it in future, in the near future, if somehow the whole genome testing became A, suddenly affordable, and B, everyone could just be resequenced using existing samples, and C, there was enough computing power to do the comparisons, because it would add this layer of precision that would be a thing of great beauty. Now, whether it would really bring about amazing breakthroughs in what we could know, I don't know. I can live with the kind of fuzziness we have now with the SNP testing, but I would love it if that can come forward. And obviously there'll be a time in the future when that does happen, but I don't personally know if it's going to be within 5 years, 10 years. We'll see.
We'll see. So if somebody wants to collaborate or has, some ideas for you on things that, may be good to have as tools in DNA Painter, how do they get a hold of you? How do they reach out to you?
There are a couple of primary ways, I suppose. I've got a user group on Facebook. That's often how people do that. So that's the DNA Painter user group on Facebook. I think it's got 12 or 13,000 people in it. So it's moderately busy, but quite kind of calm, polite. And then also you can email me. I just have a jonny@dnapainter.com email address. That's JONNY. Those would be the best ways, probably.
And
Great.
We've got one more question as we're wrapping up. Can you share one of the favorite mysteries that DNA Painter has helped solve?
For me,
or for anybody?
Anyone. Yes, he says, slightly struggling in his head for one. Honestly, probably the key thing for me isn't exactly when it solves a mystery. It's when it verifies that you were definitely on the right track all along. Like people always say, well, chromosome mapping must be the answer that must be the way I solve my mysteries. And I always have to somehow say, well, no, it isn't, but it's still brilliant and you should do it. Because for me, chromosome mapping helps to kind of lay it on the line and make things clear. But what I love to do is, use something like what are the odds. So I've used what are the odds to help people find out who their parents were, which is incredible, like I've lost father. But if you then map the chromosomes and you see it all kind of slot into place, and you can see that you were totally right, that's a big one for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's been so exciting.
Well, thank you, Jonny, for spending time with us today in this day celebrating DNA and many accomplishments. And if you have any more questions for Jonny, feel free to reach out to him. Or if you just need help with general DNA questions, please sign up for a free consultation at FamilySearch, the library. And we hope to see you again in one of these wonderful podcasts, that Wendy is always coming up with. And I think this has been just a delight to have you here, Jonny. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Edgar. And thank you, Wendy.
Yes, it was delightful. And everyone, we will